Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Robby Dawkins. Robby, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yes, well, it's thanks for having me on, both of you. I really appreciate this. But yeah, I'm in Dallas, Texas, in the United States, and for the past good grief, probably 15 years have been focused on training and equipping the church around the world to operate in signs and wonders, to bring people to Christ. Basically living the book of Acts. It's sort of God's strategy for evangelism, to, heal the sick, cast out demons, raise the dead, see God move in power, and bringing people to Christ through that. And so I've had the privilege of doing that around the world. I was doing it. I pastored a church for 17 years. Before that, for 12 years, I was a youth pastor. And I grew up in ministry my whole life. And so today it's just now about, it's like John Wimber, who made a big influence on my life, used to say, I used to love, shooting the ball, and in basketball, shooting the ball and making the 3-point shot. Now my greatest joy is passing the ball to others and watching them make the 3-point shot. And that's definitely the phase of life I'm in now. And so about 20 years ago, I got connected with some underground leaders in Iran. Some of them weren't underground. Some of them were registered churches there, and started working with them and training them in healing and prophetic ministry for the purpose of evangelism. And then ended up 18 years ago, got an invitation for Afghanistan, and then went there and started working with them. And so, and training underground leaders there. And so, I have a passion for, especially in the Muslim world, I have a passion for the whole world. I mean, we're all about global transformation, all of us who are in ministry, but started, focusing mainly on the Muslim world, and just realizing that it was key in connecting with Muslims, realized that you weren't gonna argue with them into faith. You had to produce, a power ministry, or you're just not going to bring them around, really. And so started focusing on that in those parts of the world, and just, started seeing fruit and it multiply. And so that's where my big passion is, and to wake up the West and to say, hey, come on, we're coming under a cloud of control, and a cloud of dominance, from the enemy through government and through everything else, and that if we're not careful, we'll end up losing the very freedom that Christ intended us to have in order to advance his kingdom. So in a nutshell, that's what that's where I'm at, what I'm doing, and what I'm about.
Okay, and then for people that listen to this, they say, I like Robby, I want to find out more about him, I want to follow him, see what he's doing. Where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, we're on social media. It's just, my name is with a Y. It's not the traditional. My mother was Scottish, and for some reason she deviated from the Robbie and went for Y for some reason, I think, to make it distinct. But it's robbydawkins.com is my website. And then I'm on Instagram and on Facebook as well. And we put a lot of information there to communicate with people. We also, have newsletters that people can sign up for on our website, things like that. And so, but that we share a lot about our ministry through those mediums.
Okay, and I'll put those links in the description box. So if you're listening, they're ready for you to go and check out.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Appreciate that.
People often say to me, Daphne, how did you know your purpose? In fact, I was asked that just yesterday. When did you know what your purpose was? And I think very few actually sort of at about the age of about 8 say, I know what my purpose is. Purpose is unfolding, and my purpose is when I get up this morning to be all God intended me to be, and when I get up tomorrow, it's all about who God intended me to be. But there are things in our past that actually I think are created into our DNA that propel us forward to be where we are today. Do you look back and say, yeah, there are these things that I believe became a part of who I am and have propelled me forward?
Well, yes. I mean, I was, as I much could imagine Andrew could identify, I was conditioned, prepped, and totally given propaganda to be a gospel advancer. From the time I was little, I mean, literally, people told me, people who said they heard it firsthand, that like when I was 2 years old and, was just forming a vocabulary, would say that I said I was gonna, when I grew up, I was gonna be a missionary. And I remember at 10 years old and 12 years old we had here in the States, we had what they call career day, and you would go dress up in whatever career you were going. And a lot of people had doctors stuff on, other people dressed up like rock stars or movie stars or what. And I always went in Japanese garb because that's where I was born. My parents were missionaries in Japan when I was born. And I would always go up and go in Japanese garb that my parents had brought back, and I'd tell everybody I was going to be a missionary. And it was never, for me, Daphne, it was never really I didn't ever feel like it was even a choice. And let me clarify that statement. It wasn't that I felt forced, and by no means did I feel forced, pressured, anything like that. Conditioned, yes, but never forced to pursue that. It was always that that I just knew. I just always had a knowing from early age that ministry was my destiny. It was who I was. It was my DNA. I'm a 5th generation pastor from my mother's side. My mother was also, she had gone to seminary and was actually after coming back from Japan was a prof at a Bible college, and my father was as well. But I just grew up in ministry my entire life, and so it was just always when my parents came back from Japan, I think it probably when I look back at it, I think they felt like it was the right decision and all that. But I think my mother was actually not happy because she had promised to God and committed to God that she would, commit her life to missions when she was 10 years old. It's a powerful story, actually. And that, that she would give herself. She literally took an offering basket at a missions conference, sat it down in front of everyone and stepped inside. And she said, I'm just a poor pastor, farmer. My grandfather was a pastor and a farmer. She said, I'm just a poor pastor farmer's daughter. She said, I have no money to give. She said, so I give myself. She goes, sorry, I get a little choked up when I talk about this. She goes, I'll go to a nation no one wants to go to, and I'll give my life to share the gospel with them there. And so my mom was always committed to go where people didn't want to go. And then many years later, I didn't know that story until I was 15 years old. And my grandfather called me over. We were visiting him, and he told me that story. And he said, when she gave herself, she gave you. And he said, you'll go to nations no one wants to go to, and you'll share the gospel, and you'll train people to share the gospel. And of course, at the time, I just thought it was, kind words from my grandpa, but it was I later realized it was actually quite a prophetic moment and quite a calling moment. Even though I knew my whole life I was called to ministry, there was never, for me, it was never like a deciding point. And my mom poured into me, as we had a bit of a discussion before the program, like with you, Andrew. My mother poured into me, all these books of all of these, heroes and, in the faith. And I remember her giving me, several different books growing up that were just, that were impactful. God's Smuggler by Brother Andrew. Brother Andrew actually gave me a signed copy of that book. It was like, to me, I want to frame it and put it on the wall because it was so precious, to me, because I remember hearing him live at 8 years old and going, I'm going to do what he does, what he's doing. That's what I want to do. And that's where, I want to be involved in that. And just these people that were heroes of the faith, Corrie ten Boom, The Hiding Place, Through the Gates of Splendor, the 5 missionaries, just throughout, different, just different people, that just made massive impact and shaped my whole life for doing what I'm doing today. But yeah, so it started early, and I was hooked very, very early on. And my parents always looked up to, for us in our house and in my dad's churches that he pastored, after coming back from the field, whenever a missionary came into town or was a part of our church or something or visiting, they were always, they got the greatest seat of honor. My family honored people that went to foreign fields, for the gospel, more than anyone else. And so I think that got into me too, just seeing that, oh, wow, these are people that are really worth, kind of double honor. It really bothers me. Can I just say this? It's totally off topic. I think you guys are going to identify. It really irritates me. Beyond bothers, irritates me, drives me crazy. When people will take missionaries and they'll take I found this to happen when I go speak someplace, and if they see my platform and my following or something, and they put me in a really, really nice hotel, but they'll put a missionary in somebody's back room in the back of her house, and I'm like, let me trade with them. That irritates me, because these are people that are sacrificing, giving themselves, uprooting their families. And it would so bother me that they didn't give them greater honor than somebody like me, and so that always disturbed me. But in our home, it was the exact opposite. And so that being championed to you as a young boy shapes the rest of your life. And so we still operate out of that. Pastors will come say, very known pastors, friends of mine, famous people, and we're like, yeah, I'll have lunch with you. But man, if they come in and they've been a missionary, we'll go all out for them. We'll do whatever we can. We take them to the best places, do the best thing, because we just see those people as the people that really deserve double honor. So anyway,
yeah,
I'll get off my soapbox on that one.
I think from our conversation before recording, I think we have very similar hearts and mindsets on a lot of things, that included. Out of interest, your mum felt this calling at 10 years old to the missions, to the nations. How old was she when she actually went to Japan or to her First Nation full time?
No, it was she was in her early 20s.
Okay.
The
reason I ask is we often meet a lot of people who are on the mission field, often elderly people, and we say to them, how old were you when you actually felt your calling to the nations? And they'll say, I was a child when I first felt that calling. But often they didn't end up going until they were much older. And it was, no one was there to catch that calling and to equip them and train and prepare them and to send them out. And even we'll meet older people who will be in their sick room and they'll just start crying because, again, they felt that calling to missions as a child and they never went. And they're older and they still have that longing to be out there, but they've missed it, and because no one was there to help them capture it. So it's interesting just your mum felt that calling, but she was one that actually was caught and was equipped and was sent out.
Yeah, I honestly don't think she had much equipping.
That might be best.
She had a yes, Jesus had her yes, and that's all she needed, and so back then, there really wasn't much equipping for missionaries, and of course back then there was not a lot of, you guys know this language working in the world, but there wasn't a lot of training for contextualization. We were, as we in the West have, done in, places like India and in Africa and throughout, is that we go in and we radically change their culture, thinking that's Christianity, when all we're doing is reculturalizing them and anti-culturalizing them, but she had no understanding of, contextualization and ministering in that. But my parents quickly adapted that. They saw that, look, we're not going to reach the Japanese people. My mother used to always say this. It's really fascinating because my dad was always focused on the adults and only had 1 or 2 converts, as is typical in Japan, over 4 years. My mother had, probably 50. And it's because my mother focused on the children. She kept telling my dad, the key to any nation are the children. And so she focused on the children. And when the kids in the different communities, she would kind of do like almost little one-day vacation Bible schools. We call them that here in the West. I don't know if you guys call them that, but just sort of, like a one-day, Bible lesson and teaching and evangelism thing for kids. And she would go into these villages in Japan and do those. And they were, it was free. They would have some food and things like that to attract the kids. And they would come present the gospel. And my mom had many converts. And I remember, and they would call her the Jesus lady, because they were like, all she does is talk about Jesus. So they called her the Jesus lady. And I was in, my friend Todd White and I were in Tokyo doing a conference there. And one of the main leaders of the Church of Japan, 2 of them actually came running up to me and they said, "We're in that picture." I posted a picture of her in one of those villages. They said, "We're in that picture." And they said, "We remember the Jesus lady. And we remember then we're here preaching the gospel and leading the Church of Japan today because the Jesus lady came to our village." And
Wow.
It was just like full circle, man, realizing the impact, of what that made. And then she was right, it was certainly the key, in all of that. Yeah. So that was throughout my life. That shaped my everything about myself, And
one of the phrases we use is, to turn a nation, you have to take the next generation.
Oh, that's really good. I love that.
And that's
what she other religions do. That political systems, they know that if they're going to turn a nation, they have to take the next generation. But within the church, it's the weakest area. It's the least resourced. We don't give our strongest leaders to the next generation. We wonder why we're struggling. But your mum, whether she knew it from that perspective or not, she knew that a key was to go young and to reach those children. Yeah. And of course,
I think for her, it was a real revelation thing, just of realizing it. I think my dad kind of wrote it off as the classic man would back in those days as, oh, you're a woman, you like babies, you like, that's being, sort of maternal and, that's just your natural thing. But it really wasn't with my mom. My mother knew that it was a kingdom strategy and that it was a significant one. And of course, my dad, years later was like, ooh, I should have put more attention to that. I should have joined you in that endeavor, because fruit for her was just like, just happening all over the place. But it's so good.
Yeah. And with you being raised reading books like Fox's Book of Martyrs or reading about Nate Saint, Jim Elliot, and those guys that, so many of these people that literally gave their lives for the gospel, when it came to you, you pastored a church in Aurora, Illinois, and you were saying it's in a rough area. Now, did you intentionally seek a rough area to plant a church in? How did that come about? I'm just wondering if these books and this seeing these kinds of people that went to these dangerous situations impacted on where you decided to put your church. Did you go, I want to be somewhere dangerous like these guys were, that's where I'm going?
Yeah, like our conversation before we started the recording, there was definitely there was a sense always in me when we went to go plant a church, we planted a vineyard church. We would again, because John Wimber had made a big impact on me. I got really impacted in the Toronto blessing, and that move that really lit me up. And I remember turning to some friends there, and I said, "Man, if you could bottle this and take it to the streets, this will change the world." And they were like, there's a book on that called Power Evangelism and the Book of Acts. And I was like, oh yeah, hang on, And so I immediately, went back and when we started to look, we knew we were called to plant a church. I was not in the vineyard. I was not a part of that. But when we started to look, everybody was like, you can't go to Aurora. It's too dangerous. You won't gather there. The culture, the types of churches that particular group, planted were in more middle class, upper class areas, not really in, sort of, as we say in the States, in the hood, type of thing, or in that type of culture. And so they were like, yeah, that's not where, these work best. And so hearing that you can't was like, that must be God. Because the impossible is always the invitation. And so it was, as soon as I heard that, and I heard that this is not a good place to go, this would not, it won't work. I was like, well, that's where we got to go. And again, it was the conditioning of my mother of, I'll go be a missionary where no one wants to go. And so that impacted me, and that thinking always followed me throughout my life. And so I immediately began to, gravitate and draw to that type of thing and go, okay, this is now the assignment. And so going there, all the impossibilities again were invitations to me. And so how it started was I just started reading in the newspaper and seeing on the news stuff about Aurora and about how dangerous it was, that the gangs were ruling the city. And I was like, man, that just sounds like a place where Jesus would go and start a church. And so it just made sense,
Jesus never did anything risky like that.
Yeah. He played it safe. Safety is in the 10 Commandments, isn't it? I mean, It's right there in his commissioning to go into all the world. Don't lay your life down.
Be careful not to take any risks.
Yeah.
Go and bubble
I'll just
around.
say, children are raised with the words, be careful.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And that's something that, I'm glad you said that, Daphne, because there's something that I would see that with other parents with their kids. And, my dad, my mom would say, be careful sometimes with, crazy stuff like me trying to jump my bicycle off a ditch or something, and, but I remember, my dad was always like, all right, she's not looking, jump, and that was always, that stuck in me. And I remember when I first started having children, and I started kind of being that careful, be careful, don't do that. You could get hurt. Don't do that. And all of a sudden I realized, I thought, man, how did I become more of, the safety person than what I grew up with? That's not what I grew up with. And it hit me that I was moving to the place of caution, and that I was actually doing damage to my kids by doing that. I never realized that that's what I was doing, but I began to realize that, I'm actually, it was a conversation I was having with, and it was like, you're actually putting them in harm's way. Being careful is not, saving my life is God's job. Spending my life is mine. And so if I get to the point to where I'm focused on saving my life, and how much of our prayers as Christians are, Lord, keep me safe. Lord, keep me from harm. Lord, keep me from danger. Lord, keep me. And all of that is an absolute against everything that Jesus told us to do. And so, and actually that caution and that safety and all that. And I began to realize I'm actually putting myself in harm's way, because Jesus said, if you try to save your life, what will happen to it? You'll lose it. But if you spend your life for the sake of the kingdom, you'll live the life you were always intended to live. You'll live the best life you could live. And so when that revelation of that hit me, I was like, so I switched, and it probably confused my kids. They probably thought I had become a bit schizophrenic or something, because I went from careful, no, don't do that, shh, be quiet, da da da, to go, run, do it, jump, leap, jump off the roof of the house, go for it. It just, all of a sudden the gloves were off, and my kids today, they all love the Lord. They're all, my two oldest sons are, in pastoral ministry, and they're all passionate about, they're all, every time they find out I'm going to Afghanistan, they're like, you got to take us, quit saving all the good stuff for yourself and let us join in. And I'm like, let's do it. So it really is about that sort of early formation, that does make a massive impact. Anybody watching this who has kids, please don't go the safe route. You'll really damage and hurt them. And you're not communicating what God communicates to them. You're not in sync with the will of God for their life, And so that was a big thing for me. And as I began to realize that, I began to realize, well, I've got to change that.
Well, people say to me, well, what do we say instead? And I said, well, you've got to look what the Bible says. The Bible says be bold, and the Bible says be wise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not going to go and jump off the roof of my house. That isn't wisdom. And I won't have you
Daphne, you would have done it at 10. Come on.
But to say to them,
I did it in churches in Russia when the snow was
you did it in Russia. And did I let you?
I scaled the church buildings and jumped into the snow.
Yeah, I was cheering you on, and all the pastors followed you in the end. But so I say to them, tell them to be bold and be wise. That's a biblical mandate.
Good. Yeah.
I agree with you. And I remember you saying once, Andrew, you said, I feel uncomfortable in comfortable situations and comfortable in uncomfortable situations, because that's become your normal. And
I identify with that. Yeah.
When I was under armed guard, they were under armed guard. When I was stormed by police, they were stormed by police. When I was nearly macheted, he was nearly macheted. Because it says, as for me and my house, we will serve.
No, it says love the Lord.
No, it just doesn't.
Nice try.
Yeah. But that's what it is.
That's what people think.
That's what people think
that's
it
right.
says. So we were going to do it together, and that was it. Anyway.
See, that's how you spend family time. I mean, people don't realize when we grow up in homes like we grew up in, Andrew, that was family time. People are always saying, well, you're always doing ministry. You're always doing, and I'm like, I take my kids to a movie. I just took my kids last night bowling. I mean, we do fun things too, but for the most memorable times that we've had together was ministry together. And it was quality time. It was quality shaping. It was, all of that development. And that for us who grew up in that was family time. That was with my parents. When my dad went to the hospital to go visit somebody, we always went along. When he went to dangerous parts of the city. I remember at 7 years old, him taking me to underground Atlanta. And that's back when underground Atlanta was, a bunch of drugs and prostitution and, violence. And, he would take me along. The first time I got beaten up and like knocked out, was when I was 5 years old, going with a group of boys in Atlanta, which is in the southeast part of the United States, Atlanta, Georgia. And we went to a housing project, and, we were all these white kids, going in to express the love of Jesus to all of these black kids. And they thought, back then, this is in the early 70s, we got jumped and I got knocked out and left with the back of my head bleeding, laying in a ditch at 5. Or excuse me, I say 5, at 6 years old. But, that was, that was something that, of course it did affect me a little bit in the sense I was scared for a while. to be around Black people. But then my dad had me sit down with people in our church that were Black who had been horrifically abused by white people and hear their stories. And I was like, oh, he's like, see, that's what those kids were thinking when you came into the neighborhood, and we got to change their thinking. Well, then all of a sudden I wasn't afraid anymore, because I realized, oh, I'm helping change, this is important. And so all of that impacts us, as we step out. Now, some people would look at that and probably say it wasn't wise. My mother did. My mother was like, that was not a wise move to my dad at 6 years old, But actually, I see that as a trophy moment for me. I've had other times for the gospel where I've endured a lot and things like that, and persecution, but that set the tone, that made me, my dad actually said something powerful to me after that. I'll never forget it. And I was only 6. I remember the words. He looked at me and he goes, "You're in a place now of special honor." And he said, because this has happened, to you, he goes, you'll be a part. He would tell me, he said, the closest seat to the throne of heaven are those who've lost their lives for the sake of the gospel, and those who were persecuted for the sake of the gospel. They have a special place of honor. And he goes, and it's, and he said, it's what Paul says, whom the world is not worthy of. And he goes, you're in a place of special honor to sit with people now whom the world is not worthy of. And he goes, that's a small circle, son. He goes, hold your head high, and even as a young boy, that made sense to me, and so, yeah, all that stuff set my course for sure.
I know we're skipping forward a bit. I mean, I know we could stop on any of these points and talk for a while.
All day we can talk about that. Yeah.
So what was the transition from you going from being the senior pastor of a church to now moving into this itinerant ministry? You're traveling all over the world, and especially into sort of the Middle East and unreached persecuted nations. What was that transition? What prompted you to do that?
Yeah, when I was pastoring, I started off as a youth pastor, of course, and then moved to senior pastor. And part of it is because the young people I was bringing into the church where I was a youth pastor became very uncomfortable for the church I was at. I was bringing in the kids that were on drugs, the kids that were, loose in life, sexually promiscuous, things like that. And they were getting saved, they were being transformed, but in that was an adjustment of language, adjustment of sinful culture, things like that. It was a process. And I remember the pastor and elders of the church I was at felt like that was corrupting the youth group. Now the truth is that youth group was already corrupted. They were, they just weren't living for the Lord. Really, they went to church every Sunday, but they weren't living for God. And these guys all of a sudden were. And even though they were still in transition, it's like James says, I'm being saved, but I began to realize that was going to require me, going to a church. And what they complained about was cigarette butts in the parking lot. They never had cigarette butts in the parking lot. For them, that was a big no-no, a big sinful thing. And
bad.
To me, that was the goal. Like cigarette butts in parking. Yes, we're getting the right people. But for them, that wasn't. They were like, no, we want you to come and focus on our kids. We don't want you bringing other kids, in here unless they look like our kids, act like our kids. And so I quickly realized
you're starting to press on some of our hot buttons here. So just be careful.
I started realizing, man, I'm going to have to go plant my own church. This is not going to work. And like I said, I planted a vineyard church, which for the vineyard too, we were out of the box because nobody was planting churches in the areas like where I was wanting to plant. And they were even saying, that doesn't work. You can't do that. And again, whenever I've heard you can't do that or that's impossible, to me, that's an invitation. I'm sitting there literally going, God's probably in that. And so we went to plant a church in Aurora, which was in the top ranked. It's a part of the Chicago area, but it's ranked, that city, it's the second largest city in Illinois, but it's ranked as one of the top 10 most dangerous cities in the United States. That's excluding Chicago, and Chicago also has a lot of dangerous areas too. But so we went there, we planted it. For some people, they wouldn't look at it as a huge success. It was to us because it was a major part of changing the city of Aurora. And what I learned there, working with the gang members in that city, trained and equipped me to work with radical Muslims. And I began to, because they operate out of the same, the gangs operate out of sort of the same mentality and ideology. And so, they rule by intimidation and fear, and all of that. And I learned how to deal with that. I learned how to not fear for my life. I learned how to lay that down. I had a couple of different times guys show up in the church with guns and, were saying they were going to shoot me while I was preaching and things like that. And I mean, things I knew beforehand, and I was, sort of jumping around the stage while I was preaching, trying to make sure that if they're going to take a shot, they better be good because I'm not going to make it easy for them. But God ended up touching both of those guys and they ended up giving their lives to Christ, as a result, but they didn't come there for that. They came there to kill me. And so all of that really set my course, and I started thinking about it. And John Wimber used to always say, faith is spelled R-A-S-K. And I was like, well, if that's now his widow, Carol Wimber, has told me many times, she goes, you have taken that to the maximum level. And I was like, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to take that to the max. And I began to realize, well, the greater risk you take, the more signs and wonders you'll see. The more risks that you take, the more risks you step out. And I started shifting that in my thinking. Now, I know for a lot of people who work in these dangerous parts of the world too, this is pretty radical thinking, but I started off, I would have security, would have some of that. And then I switched to where I wouldn't take any. And what I noticed when I didn't have any, we saw more. And it was almost like living that more extreme risk was, going to, we just had, some trucks and transporting some people in the Ukraine right now with what's happening there. And they were like, man, to get this through. Now they're thinking, we got to get medical supplies, we got to get food, in these big, massive lorries, these big, huge trucks. If we're going to, get those in, we probably should try to have some security. I said, a security on anything like that in a war-torn country is like a bullseye. You're like inviting, trouble. You're drawing more attention to yourself. Even when I do Pakistan, I won't even let there be anybody with guns in any of the arenas or in the fields, because again, it minimizes the level of signs and wonders. It's just been the truth. It's my experience that is very true. And so I shifted my thinking and we started saying, well, let's take this to a whole nother level. Let's go. So, when I went to, I'm sorry, I'm not answering the question.
No, keep going. Please keep going.
I went into, when I went to Afghanistan the second time, I had a wealthy friend say, hey, I want to hire Blackwater, which is one of the top security companies in the world. I'm sure you guys have heard of them because they're, all over or in the more dangerous parts, and I was like, absolutely not. I said, give me that money, for the work I'll do there, let me take it there and spend it for stuff there, but not for security. Because I've always found that when we do that it actually minimizes signs and wonders. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but I certainly found as I stepped that up and took that to that level, the other thing is it made the indigenous people there respect me because they're seeing me come in and live like they do without having that. And they all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, so they'd listen to what I'm saying. They would respect what I'm saying because they said, you're coming in and you're here as we are, and even seeing me, take punches, take hits, get arrested. I've been arrested in Afghanistan 3 different times. And with each occasion, one time in Russia and then 3 times in Afghanistan, but with each occasion, each situation, I began to realize the more that we moved to a place of safety, the less we would see in miracles and signs and wonders. And so we started pushing that envelope a little bit harder and going, well, if that's the case, let's take more risk. Let's do it more. And what I found too is that the Lord's increase takes place, and that but it also gives you an incredible equity with the indigenous people, to where they're like, okay, we'll listen, we'll follow what you're saying, because our excuses aren't going to work with you because you're crazy. But it actually impacted them. And so those kind of things happen. But back to your original question, when I started, and all of that really began to hit when I was in those places where guys were coming with guns in the church. And when I say that, they weren't coming out pointing a pistol right at me, they had it hidden in their clothing and somebody spotted it. We had a lot of guys who had come out of those gangs that were at our church, and they could tell when they say, street language here is strapping. When you're strapping, that means you have a concealed weapon. And they would see that, and they would come in and point it out to me. And we always had the thing where we would not try to disarm them. We wouldn't try to do anything like that, but just watch God intervene. And, there's many people who that hasn't worked for. They died for the gospel in doing that. And those are heroes. They're heaven's heroes, And so, I either way, I love Paul's dialogue. It's kind of like a conversation he's having with Satan. And he's like, if you kill me, I go to heaven. If I stay here, I get to preach the gospel. It's a win-win situation. Either way, I win. So, do your best, but either way, I win, in the end. And once I sort of adapted that thinking, ministry went to a whole new level. The fruit of our ministry went to a whole new level. And so, and you guys know, one of the keys in all of this is just perseverance. It's just not quitting. Stay with it. Don't bail. Let God run the interference for you. Let him do that work. And he will, if you let him do it. He'll be your best security anyway. Yeah. But, so that everything went to a whole new level then. And then I started, as I started, I was like, well, if I'm going to do that, I don't want to just work in Eastern Europe or, Latin America, let's go where it really matters. And so I started focusing. I had a connection with a friend in Iran, started connecting with him and saying, hey, how can I serve you guys, help you guys? What can I do? And that started a relationship. And of course that began to build over the years, where you're seen as it's crazy because I'm seen as a trusted person and I'm seen as a not trusted person. But the not trust is because of the danger, because of the risk I'll take. The trusted thing. But what I found with the people who don't take the, like I would meet missionaries in Afghanistan who would just stay in their houses, never go out and share the gospel, never go out and I'm like, why are you here? The point of doing this is to, and they're like, well, that could get you killed. And I'm like, we're all going to die. The mortality rate in the world is 100%. My goal is to spend that in the best way possible and to make it count the most. And, but literally there were people that were, well, we're just kind of prayer walking and those are all great. I love that too. It's all important, but gospel presentation is key. And so in missions, because you guys work in this, there's two forms of missions. There's either relief work, which is providing aid or assistance or, helping rescue people, things like that. And then there's gospel, advancement. And my dad used to always say, never make the mistake of getting involved in relief work, only get involved in gospel advancement and, make that your focus, your goal. And I always lived by that until, recent crisis has happened where you're like, okay, people that I've been working with are all going to die if I don't help them type of thing. But so when I was pastoring, all of a sudden what began to happen was, word kind of got out about stuff I was doing in other parts of the world, and even in Aurora. We began to see Aurora change. Crime began to drop because of the strategies that the Lord had showed me, and all that. And then I remember a friend of mine, Bill Johnson from Bethel, and Randy Clark. They said, really, your church is now the world. Expand your thinking, and don't get stuck in just where you're at, but start thinking more globally. And I was like, okay. And I heard the Lord in that. I wasn't just taking their word as noted friends or respected friends, but I heard the Lord in that. And so I started going, okay, that's what I need to do. And so started putting a focus on that, and it started off honestly more in the US. I started going around training, but I did get a little frustrated. Not a little, that's lying. I got a lot frustrated and angry, and really ticked off. And that's me cleaning up my language right now to say all that, at the fact that I was just looking at the Western church and going, they're not doing it. I'm going there. They're like, oh, that's wonderful. They would they'd be able to tell your stories. And I'm like, go get your own stories. This is about, the stories are there as all those books were to motivate me to go get my own stories. These are now there to motivate you to go get your own stories. This is an invitation. Don't just sit there and go, ooh, that was so sweet. That was so nice. No, now it's an invitation for you to go and do the same. And that would irritate me, that all of a sudden, people would just sort of see it as great storytelling and not see it as an invitation. So with that, I started going, let me train and equip people where I think they're going to really take it and do it, and not just listen to it. And so that drew us into working in, Iran, and then subsequently Afghanistan, and throughout the Middle East now, to do that. I've ministered in, I think, 72 countries around the world, but where my heart really is right there. And where my heart is for the places where people say that's impossible. That's where I always want to go. That I'm on 2 hit lists, Muslim hit lists, because of that, and again, those are, as Daphne said before, these things are badges of honor. I don't see that as something to be afraid of. My kids aren't scared of it. They understand the realities of all that. But at the same time, again, that heightens, the activity of the Spirit when you go and do stuff. Anyway, that's a long run on talking for me. Sorry about that. But
no, you're good. Do you have a question? I can see you sitting there thinking.
No, I've got a lot of questions. I'm just wondering which way to run, in which direction.
I know.
But I think that get your own story. I feel very, very strongly about the way that we hear over and over and over again, and nothing happens. And we have actually taken the step of refusing to let people come to a conference we did or something like that, because they've heard it before, they've been in it before, and they're not doing anything. And the reason why I think we are responsible as people speaking is Pharaoh heard the message over and over again, and the result was his heart got harder and harder and harder. And I think often people who hear over and over again, their heart gets harder and harder and harder. And I think whether they're people, pastors, whether they're people like us who speak, whatever, we need to be careful that in our enthusiasm we're not just hardening people's hearts. We're going back to a place, we've been a few times, but we do a series of conferences, and the 3rd conference, I'm going to ask people, come up and say what you have done as a result of the last 2 times we came. Because if we don't include that, I think we are responsible as well. So get your own story.
Yeah.
Definitely. And do you have people come up and say, can you pray for me to have your anointing?
Oh, of course.
I bet
I'm
you do. Like,
do you
I
really
like.
want to, do you really want to be on those Muslim hit lists?
I'm
Yeah,
like.
sure. I'll pray for you to do that.
I say, live my life and you'll get it. It's my
Yeah,
answer to them.
that's good. I'm stealing that. That's a great answer. People don't realize, too, the significance of, if you pray an impartation for somebody or an anointing of somebody, there's a responsibility in that. That you can't just leave that on the shelf. You can't just go, oh, I got an impartation from Daphne. Oh, wow. There's an accountability for that we'll give to God if we receive something like that and not do anything with it. And that's what I love about the language of activation, and doing all that. Here's something I use with, and I'm going to use this particular one because it doesn't have my numbers on it, but I tell this to like the Iranians and the underground church leaders. This is my bank card. And I'm showing you this one because it doesn't have any numbers on it or anything to where anybody can hijack it. But when we get this, you guys know, you get a sticker on the front that says you got to activate it in order for it to work.
Yeah.
Now, if I gave this to you and I said, hey, this has all my money on it, or this has my money, how much is on there? You don't know until you activate it. You don't know until you start spending it, till you start using it. And then you find out what's on there. Power and authority and anointing works like that. We don't know what we've got until we start using it. And it's not any good until we start using it. If I never take that and use it, then it's never going to go anywhere. It's never going to make any impact. But that is when Jesus said, all authority has been given to me and I am in you, there's now a responsibility to activate that and to put that to use. And if we don't, we're responsible. We'll give an account for that. And so, people don't realize how significant that is and how seriously God takes that, and so it's, that's the whole, principle of the talents and the guy who buried the talents, and did nothing with it. He's not talking about money alone. He's talking about, gifts and callings and things that God has put on our lives and stuff. And we're not using that for the purpose that he's given it to us for. There's an account that'll be given for that. And so I think that's so significant that people just don't realize how serious God takes that. And he takes it very serious. And we've got to follow through with that. But the conference hopping, and I love inspiring people, but with an objective. I don't want to be a show pony, and just come in and watch me do my tricks on stage. And you go, ooh, wow, that's not, what's the point of that? Everything with the gospel is about multiplication. And if we're not multiplying, I want another phrase, sorry, I'm quoting him so much, but John Wimber used to say, move with the movers. And if they're not moving, don't move with them because they won't move. And that's something I've really learned. One of the things that I have young people constantly, millennials say, hey, I want to go with you to Afghanistan. I want to go with you to Iran. I'm like, have your pastor or leader or, tell me the stuff you're doing in your community and I'll consider that. But if you're not doing anything in your community, I'm not taking you with me because to me, that's a waste. I want to move with people that are actually already put into practice and put into action what's been given to them, because then I know they'll take and they'll do something with it, No,
we'll sign us up.
That's right.
I'm on your team. What are you talking about? You guys have been doing this longer than I have. I'm on your team.
Robby,
so good.
There are so many other things that I want to touch on, but we'll stop here. And we'd love to do this again. We can dive into some other things that we talked a bit about off camera beforehand. But thank you so much. There's a lot for people to think about here, and really encourage listeners to do what Robby just said. Just start doing things and start creating your own stories. And
if somebody tells you can't, hear that as permission. Hear that as an invitation.
Oh,
maybe you're going in the right direction.
Andrew, I'm going to cut right across your finishing. Mm-hmm. You have to finish with the Rebecca story.
Oh no, are you kidding me?
No, I'm not. You
I'm
have
baited.
to finish with
you gotta
the
tell me
Rebecca
now.
story.
Yeah, so sometimes, if I'm speaking somewhere, I might end, especially if I'm talking to young people, I might end with telling them the story that I'd heard. I can't remember where I heard it from, but how one day we'll be at the marriage supper of the Lamb, and maybe you're sitting at a banquet table, and across from you there's this young girl, and so you say, "Hey, what's your name? Where are you from?" And she says, "Oh, I'm Rebecca. I'm from Rome." And she says, I'm 12 years old. How did you get here? And so she says how, she was at home with her family one day, and these Roman soldiers came and they took her parents to the Colosseum. And her younger brother went to the Colosseum. And while they were standing there, they were looking in, they could see the parents in the arena and these other people from their village. And as they were watching, the lions were released. And she says, my parents were killed that day. And she says, me and my brother at home, and those same guards came back to our house and they took us to the Colosseum. And as they were waiting to send us into the arena, one of the soldiers said to me, "Look, if you would just deny Jesus, then I'll let you live." And so she said, "How can I deny Jesus? He's my very reason for living. And I died that day." And then she looks at you and says, how did you get here?
What's your story?
And what's your story? And so what will your story be when you're looking at Rebecca? Will it be a story that you can tell confidently and unashamedly that you sacrificed your life, you gave everything you had for the gospel, and you paid a price like her? Or will it be one where you just kind of just snuck in there?
Yeah. I love it. My father used to always say this. He'd always say, "I'm not wasting my death parked on a bedpan. I want to spend it, Now, sadly enough, he did pass away that way, but I tell you what, he did everything in his power not to. He could hold his head high because he was in multiple situations where he should have been killed, where he should have been, and, multiple situations. But that's so true. I've adopted that same thing, and I love that. I love that story. That's good. I'm stealing that. I'll give you credit once.
You can have it all. Robby, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
I'm so glad to meet you guys. I felt like I've met family here, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.